We never plan this stuff. It just all kind of flows out.
Yeah, that works out really well.
What we say to each other cannot be divisive.
Gosh, I just think that when we get so focused on walking the line and just miss so much of God's creativity.
We only created the Odd Show to have this conversation.
Right.
We're gonna say some bad things about stuff.
If you're not bad things, like,
If you're a huge Toby Mac
turn it off now.
For people who are struggling with why would a God of the universe care about me individually, you are his favorite. You know what I mean?
Absolutely.
And that, ladies and gentlemen, is The Odd Show. Let's get right into it. Here's your hosts, Bruce Bugano and Thomas Hogan. Hey, welcome to The Odd Show. So, the last couple weeks, you have seen me by myself, Thomas by himself. We did a couple odd topics. And not to worry, nothing's wrong, nothing's going on. It's just easier sometimes to do it's easier to do those things kind of individually or like we're going to do this weekend than it is to try and find a internet-based platform that's not sketchy with internet connections and stuff like that. So, so this week, Sarah and I, my wife, are going to do another episode. We got some really good feedback on the two Odd Couple episodes that we did, Sarah and I, and then Thomas and Angie. And actually, it spurred some other questions and some other things. And so we're going to do one. And then in a few weeks, Thomas and Angie will be up here in Boise, hanging out with us, in Nampa, hanging out with us. Rob, who's been on the show before, and we've mentioned a number of times, him and his family are moving to Florida. They're moving back to Florida. They got.
I'm so jealous.
Yeah, they got. God just really worked some things out for them. They got the opportunity to do ministry full time. So, so watch out for some stuff coming from Redcon 1. We'll definitely kind of prompt that as he's doing that. And they're going to be like mobile ministry people.
Literally.
Doing things. They're going to be living in a trailer and ministering to people. So, and they're going to do it based in Florida. So that's awesome. So anyway, but Thomas and Angie are coming up here to kind of celebrate them with us as they get ready to leave. And Thomas and I will record a few episodes. But out of that, we're kind of coming to the realization that we're just going to have to do internet-based stuff for the most part. And I think YouTube Live works really well. So we don't have a ton of people following on that. So right now, if you want an inside view on episodes before they come out, we're going to be using YouTube Live for a little bit. And we'll let you, well, no, we won't. You should get notifications. So you should follow us on our YouTube channel. But in the meantime, like I said, we got a lot of good feedback on the episodes. And one of the things that came up from a couple people actually, and we think that it's beneficial because it's something that's not talked about in church routinely. And when it is talked about in church, it can elicit some very strong feelings, and oftentimes kind of is approached from this place that can cause hurt and not a lot of explanation given to it. So
It's pretty polarizing.
yeah, absolutely, very polarizing. That's a good word for it. So we're going to talk about that because it's come up from a number of our
You
friends.
haven't actually said what it was.
Right, I know.
Oh.
I'm being intentionally aloof.
Oh.
I have a cello now, so I can be aloof. But we're going to talk about divorce and remarriage and kind of what that looks like, and not so much divorce, but kind of dating and remarriage after divorce. We mentioned before that Sarah and I both have a previous marriage, that we have a blended family, and we thought that it'd be beneficial. You know, we're coming up on 6 years of married life next month, and we just thought, we have some friends. Sadly, it's more and more common within the church that divorce is a real thing, Oftentimes it can be a lot of shame attached to it. Even if you feel shame yourself, oftentimes, sadly, other people within the church pile that shame on, and maybe not meaning to. Maybe it comes from a place that they're just trying to kind of take a biblical truth approach. But sometimes people talk about sharing truth and miss the truth and love part. So it comes off hurtful or kind of shame, burdening. So we're going to talk about that. And
I think a good question to start out with is divorce a sin?
oh, that's a heavy.
Ooh, I went there.
That's it. I mean, like I wasn't going to talk about that.
I guess we don't have to,
no.
but-
We can.
But I mean, if you start out, I think it's a good place to start out, because if divorce is a sin, then what is dating remarriage? Bigger
Go ahead.
sins?
Go ahead.
I don't personally think divorce is a sin. Nowhere in the Bible does it say that divorce is a sin. It says God hates divorce
Right.
because of what happens to your heart and your soul during the process of divorce.
Right. There are
So-
places that talk about if you divorce and then remarry. If
Guidelines.
infidelity wasn't if infidelity wasn't a player, and some other things weren't players in it, but if you divorce and remarry, you cause that woman to commit adultery over and over and over.
Right.
So there are those, and there's a lot of polarizing conversation
Yeah.
within the church that very strong views on both ends. That yes, there's denominations that believe if you divorce and remarry, you are in perpetual sin. And there's a lot of denominations or non-denominational that take the view that that's just not the case.
So from the standpoint of this video, we do not believe that divorce is the be-all, end-all sin.
Right.
And we do not believe that remarriage is perpetual.
So
Sin.
there's a book that actually I just talked with my buddy, recommended a book that I'm going to read just from I'm getting my degree in counseling, and I want to work with couples within the church, and just from I know I'm going to experience this, and I want to have a strong biblical argument for what I believe. Not that I don't, but there's a book that this guy wrote as his dissertation, and he talks about that passage where Jesus says, "Hey, you guys, Moses allowed divorce for these circumstances, and you guys, and so the book is written around the point that, like, hey, this is what the Greek meant. This is what Jesus meant when he, or the words that he used when he said it, and kind of comes down to the conclusion that Jesus wasn't saying divorce is sinful. That he was saying, hey, there are these reasons that were given for divorce being acceptable, even though God hates it. But you guys, because up to that point where Jesus is born, like during those years prior to that, for about, I think he said for about 100 or 150 years, all of a sudden, people were taking this exception rule and just saying, and ignoring that and saying divorce is acceptable. And they were giving divorce certificates for whatever they wanted. And he, in his book, he gets to the point, and keeping in mind, I haven't read it yet, but I trust the guy that's recommending it. And, but he gets to the point in his book where he makes the point that Jesus was saying, all the stuff that you were making up, just divorcing for whatever reason you wanted to. You saw someone that was more attractive, so you just issued a certificate of divorce and then went after that. That's not okay, and you've crossed a line. So from, like Sarah said, from this perspective of the conversation we're having, believing that divorce is an end-all be-all sin and that you're in perpetual sin if you remarry eliminates the ability for God to have grace.
Yeah.
It eliminates the ability for God to redeem all things, which is a theme throughout the entirety of the Bible.
Mm-hmm.
And divorce and how bad it is not a theme throughout the entirety of the Bible. It's this one thing that's talked
Yeah.
about. Because if that's the case, if you're married and you are lusting after anybody, you look at an actress and you're like, oh man, she is so attractive, and you dwell on that, adultery. You should probably confess adultery to your wife. So, but that's not the point of the entirety of the gospel or the Bible. It's this one thing. So that's the approach that we're taking it from. And I know that people have strong opinions about it. You can share them if you want. But just know that I'm not going to get into some heated debate. If you want to respectfully, I'll take that. We'll take that if there's humility and respect in it, because we'll attempt to communicate the same way. So, dating after divorce. So my divorce was leading up to my divorce. I'd been, and I think I've shared this before, but I'd been a Christian since I was 12. And not really focused on following Jesus. I heard, we went to church all the time. We went every Sunday. We went on, during the weekdays for the most part. I was in youth group. So I heard the gospel preached. I heard things that told me how to follow Jesus. But as I got older, the legalism within my learning pushed me away to the point where I knew following Jesus was the best thing. But the legalism prevented me from doing it. So I didn't put a lot of effort into trying to follow Jesus once I left my home. I would say even prior to leaving my home as an 18-year-old, young man joining the military, I didn't put a lot of energy into trying to follow Jesus. And I didn't do that for a lot of years. Got married really young. I was 19 when I got married, and 20 when my first child was born, my first son. By 22, I had a second son, and we were married for 13 years, with the last year being divorce proceedings, last 13 months of it being divorce proceedings. But during that time, there was infidelity on both sides. There was drunkenness, like it was a bad marriage. I would say that there was no physical abuse, but there was emotional abuse probably on both sides. There was emotional hurt on both sides. Baggage, tons of baggage that was never dealt with, and a lot of selfishness. So kind of fast forwarding, 31 years old at the time, I think, and it ends like in just a horrible, horrible way. And it wasn't till it ended, that I realized. At first I thought, I don't want anything to do with Jesus. Like, this is like God, I've tried 20 years worth of being a Christian and it just hasn't worked. And God was super gentle with me. He was harsh in some areas of my life that needed to be. But he was gentle with me, and continually reaffirmed the fact that he'd been there. So that was kind of, my divorce, my decision to follow Jesus wherever that led, and figure out what it meant to be a disciple, started then in 2008, 2009, early 2009, late 2008. So that's kind of I was selfish. I didn't really understand what it meant to be a man. I just thought it meant not hurting women, not hitting women, not calling them names. But I definitely viewed women as objects more than anything. Drunkenness, pornography use, like that stuff, even though I thought, oh, this is not good, it wasn't bad, if that makes sense. Like, it wasn't this like thing that I didn't view it as something that defined me in a horrible way. I just thought, well, these are vices. It's easier to understand them as vices and accept them. And there was just a lot of selfishness. Like, I was just a lot of pride, a lot of selfishness. I was arrogant. I was far cockier than I deserved to be. at the time. So that was kind of me leading up to divorce. That's my divorce story. If you kind of wanted to share yours, and then we can get into dating.
Mine is not quite so complicated. Total, we were just married, I think, less than 4 years, and they're just. My first marriage was an act of rebellion, very, very an act of rebellion, and God is faithful, and He brought out one of the biggest blessings in my life from that divorce, which was Malachi. And when Malachi was about 15 months old, about 18 months old, we split up. Simply for the reason that my ex-husband just didn't want to be a Christian anymore, and I felt released immediately. I felt like the Holy Spirit told me, just be still. I'll fight for you. So I left and took Malachi with me, and the divorce itself was long and drawn out, and custody battle, but the whole time I felt very clearly that I was released, that I didn't have to hold on for religion's sake or faith's sake or His salvation or anything. I just felt just a clean break, and
Which was different than mine.
Yeah, very different than yours.
Because I was legally released. I was financially released. I was emotionally released from her. But spiritually, God kept me, call it discipline or whatever you want. But spiritually, God kept me attached to her and called me to seek reconciliation until she was unavailable for it. And
not discipline like punishment.
No,
Discipline
just like there were things that I need to be
teaching
accountable for, and the way that I acted, and so even though my divorce had finalized and I wasn't responsible for her or our marriage, there was no legal obligation. God kept me on a path of reconciliation until she was unavailable for it, and I remained faithful to that until she remarried, and she had.
And we were friends during that time, by the way. We'd already met. We were friends.
Yep.
Just for a few months, but we knew
Yeah,
each
it was the
other.
last few months of that prior to her my ex-wife getting remarried, and she had a child with the guy, and but once she remarried, that's where God released me, and it was very, very clear. It was the first time that I'd felt like, man, I was really obedient, and God made it clear that obedience was good, like it was a good thing.
Like, well done,
Yeah.
good and faithful servant.
Yeah.
So then, we were working at the same church. We were the only two single people on staff, so it was like a Christian dating program. And but he was no longer legally married, but I was legally married, and I guess that's where the story starts, right? We both worked at Element Church in Cheyenne, Wyoming, and I was going through a really, really hard divorce, a hard custody battle, and I don't know.
Well, I mean, so for me, leading up to, like, Sarah wasn't on my radar. We became friends. We met at staff picture day. It was the first time that we ever met. I showed up. I was in the military still, and I was volunteer position on staff. And I showed up and met her and introduced myself and was like, okay. And we took some staff pictures and did some jumping pictures, and kind of went on our way, and kind of became fast friends. And
Well, I mean, we worked together, so
Right.
we saw each other multiple times during the week, and then I volunteered with the college ministry that he was the director of. So we were friends, and we would talk, but there was without being said outright, I don't think we ever said it outright, there was he knew that my divorce wasn't finalized. And I knew that God had called him to reconciliation with his wife. So even though we were friends, we set up without, I guess, specifically saying it, there were boundaries around our friendship.
Right.
Things
And
that we wouldn't talk about.
And we met in August.
We
I
never
mean,
hung
in
out
June.
alone.
We met in June. And that was probably right in the thick of this call to reconciliation. And at the same time, God was telling me, your ex-wife is going to deny that. Like, I just felt very strongly, God was saying, I'm calling you something that will never come to fruition. And I still need you to be obedient to it. So the fact that we became friends was not this, like, it legitimately was just friendship. The same way that I would chat with anybody else on staff, and we joke with each other, and but at the same time, like, there was this kind of deep sorrow that God was taking me through, because he had moved my heart to really desiring reconciliation, and I felt like I was mourning the fact that I wouldn't be reconciled a second time. Like, there was this second separation that was occurring, with God saying, hey, this is not going to happen, but I still want you to be. And I didn't know if it was going to be weeks or months or years. Like, I had no idea how long God was calling me to this. Well, I knew he was calling me to it specifically for however long it happened, but I didn't know how long that was going to be. And then 2 months later, she remarried, and it was this, hey, you're free to go. It wasn't for another month that I realized, like, man, I really like Sarah. Like, I really enjoy Sarah.
And actually, I don't know the specific dates, obviously, but in August, during my prayer time one morning, I felt God sort of place a spotlight on Bruce. And I said, nope, not right now. I have other things to deal with. My divorce is not finalized. I have a toddler that I need to focus on and make sure that he's okay. And it was just like okay, I'm just throwing it out there. And so I notated it in a journal. I think I was praying, and it didn't come back up very often during my prayer time, but when it did, I just like, nope, not right now. Like, I'm acknowledging it, but I'm not even going to pray about it because it's not the season. And then she remarried in August. Mm-hmm. And in October is when God told him
that I would marry her. And that's kind of a whole nother story in and of itself. But so during that time, and I think this is probably a good place to, like, talk about actually dating in.
Well, and then hang on, my divorce finalized in December.
Right.
It was a couple days before my birthday.
And because I'm suave and smooth, I waited for a few weeks before I said, hey, you want to date?
He intended to wait months.
Months.
And it's a good thing, because I probably would have just moved on.
Instead, we were married within months.
Yeah.
It was like 5 months, but 4 months. Anyway, it was 5 months. But point being, that as far as dating goes, there was, I was married for 13 years, so 12 years actually together, and there was this, obviously divorce, there's this loss, but when the divorce finalized, like, as I was going through it for that whole year previous, and another year after that, there was this part of me that I really, so one of the things that I would say is, when you're divorced, wait till your divorce finalizes. Mm-hmm. Don't do it before, because I had a pastor, a friend of mine, tell me one time, like, God may do something in your heart or the other person's heart, and if you've attached yourself to somebody else, it complicates it. Mm. So wait until you're divorced. Listen to God. But one of the things I had to realize was I didn't know who I was. I had no idea who I was. As God began renewing my heart and doing things inside me, I really had to take a season, and it took a year and a half, 2 years, and even after we got married, I continued to. But by the time I met Sarah, I had a fairly good idea of who I was or who I wanted to be, who I wanted God to make me into, and maybe it was more who God wanted to make me into. Like I had a better understanding, not completely, but I had a better understanding. God had shown me areas of selfishness in my life, areas that I wasn't the father that I could be, what it meant to be an actual husband and a man inside of marriage. So when I talk with people that are kind of in the midst of divorce or on the back end of finalizing the divorce, one of the first things I tell them is do you, like, figure you out.
Do you boo?
I don't tell them do you boo. That's weird when you're talking to a guy and you call him boo, unless I'm talking to Thomas, and then I'll call him boo all day. Anyway,
I don't even get called boo.
Yeah. But one of the first pieces of advice I have when I'm talking about that with someone is figure you out. Like there was a lot of years where I thought I knew who I was, or I thought I knew who I wanted to be, and it just wasn't a good, like, one, it wasn't defined. Like if you asked me, hey, tell me about yourself, if I was trying to be honest about it, I didn't know. I had no idea, and I would just say stuff. But coming out of a relationship, coming out of a marriage, and looking at the prospect of of dating and remarriage, figure you out, and that takes time. I always wonder when people jump immediately into relationships how that's going to pan out. Like if they haven't spent time figuring out what God wants to do in their heart, or even if they're not religious, but figuring out them. Like when I got divorced, there's some tangible things, but when I got divorced, I figured out, like, man, I really want to be a creative. Like there's these things inside me. I want to write. I haven't read in years, and I enjoy reading. There's this whole world. I sinfully was listening to country music. If you listen to country music, I'm sorry. You can be saved.
Email us. Let's go for you.
I'm just kidding. That's God's music from what I understand. So, but I lived in Texas for 5 years. They really believe that it's God's music. But I discovered this whole world of different music and that I loved and enjoyed. I figured out different areas of my life that I cared about other people and other causes and other things that were not me and that were bigger than me. I realized, like, I'm really a sensitive guy. But once Jesus hit my life, like, I cried, and it wasn't because of the divorce, but I'd just cry over dumb stuff, or people would share a story with me, and I was tears, and I was just like, man, God moved my heart to just really care about people. So spend time figuring you out and listening to God for what God wants to tell you about yourself. That's the first piece of advice that I give to people. I don't know. You have anything on
Well, we
that?
talked about this last night. Then another piece of advice would be make a list. Make a list of what you want.
Oh, so this is figure out you and then figure out the other, like who you want.
Yeah. Figure out you, then figure out who you want. And I would say listen to the Holy Spirit about what would be good for you, because you can create a whole list of this perfect ideal man, and it could be or woman, and it can be so ideal that it leaves no room for grace. So we each had lists of what we wanted in our spouse, and Bruce met every single. I had 5 or 6 things, and he met every single thing. I wanted a man who was older than me. I got significantly older than me.
I knew that was coming. 8 years. Far more mature.
No, not all the time. And I wanted someone who was a specific height, I wanted him to be a person who really prioritizes family above all others, above the church, above jobs, obviously not above God, but I did not want to come in second place or third place or fourth place. I wanted our family to be one, and Bruce embodies that completely. And there are a couple other things that I had on the list, and he met every single one. So I think lists are a good thing. I think it helps you keep your focus when you're out there and you're recovering from hurt and you just want to be loved. Sometimes you could be willing to accept anyone who comes along and shows interest in you. And as a woman, that was a very real struggle that I had. Any man who complimented me or showed special attention to me, I just had to very much not immediately think of like what could be, because I wanted so desperately to not be divorced, basically.
Right. And let's be honest, like, it's not just a woman, like, it's not just something women want. That was one of the things that I struggled with wholeheartedly in large amounts, was the not wanting to be alone. I didn't want to be alone. And Thomas and I had talked about this a few weeks ago, about loneliness causing us to make poor decisions when it comes to relationships. And you can't go from 12 years of being with someone, even if it's bad. I struggle to remember any, like, I know there were good times, but I struggle to remember any actual good things that happened during our marriage, my previous marriage. So even if it's bad, you just don't want to be alone. And one of the things I struggled with the most was just this fear of being alone or being rejected, or and a list. I had a list too, and Sarah, like, God through Sarah confirmed all those things, and she met all those things, and I didn't have to compromise what I had put, and it wasn't ridiculous. It wasn't just this, ridiculous thing. And I had to, like, one of the things I had on there was less of a realization, or more of a realization, than it was something that I needed in my next wife. But it was this realization that, hey, I'm going to meet someone that's a certain age, and they're probably either going to be divorced or have a child, just because of the stage of life that they're in. So I'm going to have to figure out that part. But then also, they may want other kids. If they're younger than me, they may want other kids. And I thought I was done having kids, so I really had to wrestle with that and kind of put that on my list. Like, would I be okay with them wanting other children?
And that was on my list. Wants more kids.
So,
or yeah.
More. And God, and I worked through that with God, and came to the realization, like, and through some friends that was having a child late in life, just a conversation with a specific friend, and really worked through that, and thought, no, yeah, I could do that. I'd be okay having more children later in life. We've had a conversation before, and I've said it to people. My thing, like, be picky about who you give yourself to, and who you pursue. And Sarah's, kind of buffered that with, like, but don't be unrealistic. But I really think that you should be picky, like, when you're trying to, especially after you get a divorce. After divorce, if you spend any time thinking about who you are, and understanding you and your desires and your wants and your what you enjoy and what your heart's for, if you spend time doing that, and then you give yourself to the first person that gives you attention, and they don't compliment that in you, then it will get shut down again, and you won't get to be who God has created you to be, and that's counterproductive. It does nobody any good, and it only creates hurt and tension and difficulty, where there doesn't need to be difficulty, because honestly, remarriage after divorce is difficult already. It's already difficult. So be picky, make that list and identify that. And, I don't want to be the one that says if they don't meet the requirements of that list, dump them. But if you're like, nope, doesn't meet that, nope, and you got 6 things on there and you're like, well, they meet this one, maybe consider, look.
And it's only because they're 5'4", like.
Yeah, so really be picky, but be realistic in it, and allow grace to kind of prevail there. Like if they don't meet a certain thing, but you see that they're working towards that, or you've had that conversation, or maybe there's grace for that, and the way that that is by being friends. Don't jump into a relationship where you have to be responsible for feelings and all that. Like, be friends and figure each other out and talk. And
which is a good segue into how long should you date before you choose to get married?
I've mentioned this.
Oh.
We talked about it a little bit on our last one. But however long you're able to honor each other and God, date that long. Like, the longer that you date, I think, the better you will know each other.
Yes, I agree.
Sarah and I got married. We shared that we got married fairly quick. We knew that we were for each other, but we had to learn each other. And that's not to say if you date for 4 years that the first couple of years of marriage you're not going to learn. Marriage changes things, and you move in with each other, and you're going to learn things about each other. You're going to learn things about yourself. I had this impression of what a husband looked like. And in theory, it was perfect. In practice, it was difficult because a second person entered into that. She made, there were things that Sarah was like, I don't even know where you came up with that. And I'm like, it's biblical. And she was just like, yeah, maybe, but I don't know where that fits here. So I think date as long as you can maintain the purity of your relationship and honor amongst each other and to God.
I think if you have a desire to not date very long, then make it clear and be intentional in that short time to build trust and to communicate about the big things of marriage, like finances and children and where you're going to live, and if you can be away from family. And it's okay if you want to get married soon, but don't just flitter through 6 months and be like, okay, now we're making the biggest decision of our lives.
Right.
Like, be intentional and don't squander your time if you want a little bit of it.
Right. If you want it short.
Yeah.
We were, and I was talking with someone the other day, had coffee with someone who was like, man, we were talking about marriage within the first 2 months. And I was like, got you beat. We were talking about marriage on our first date. Because we just knew, I knew months before we started dating that she was the one, and this is going to sound morbid, but she was the one I wanted sitting by my bed when I was dying. I was watching a friend die of leukemia and watching his wife sit there and cry and hold his hand and laugh with him when he was awake. And I was just sitting in the room watching them together, and I thought, I would want that to be Sarah, or I would want to be there if that was Sarah. So, don't squander that time. That's good. Be intentional about it. Be picky. Know yourself first. Figure yourself out. And then know that regardless of how much you do all of that, marriage after divorce is hard. Remarriage after divorce is hard. There's a reason why statistics are against a second marriage. Like the divorce rate for second marriages goes up dramatically. And it's because once you've divorced the first time, giving up is easier.
Yeah.
it's just easier. It's kind of that, even though you knew it was hard going through it, making that decision just becomes easier. And there was times, I was joking with the guy I was having coffee with the other day. I was kind of joking with him, and Sarah and I, early in our marriage, were like, divorce is not an option. And then almost immediately I got orders to Japan, and we went to Japan, and there was this season where just things were so hard. Sarah was like, I just need to go back to the States and take a break. And I was like, that's the same thing. Like, in my mind, a break leads to the easy decision of divorce. And I was joking with the guy, and I was like, but we were in Japan, so she couldn't leave. Like, she was stuck. She had to stay. And there'd have been ways if she really wanted to go take a break, she could have. And kind of side note on that, there's a difference between, needing to get away and kind of refresh, even in the midst of things being good. But taking a break, to me, is just a segue into, it's just preparation for a divorce. If things are bad and you're willing to leave, it's one thing to go to a coffee shop and sit and think and collect yourself. But if you're willing to leave with no kind of time frame, like, I'll be back in a few hours, or, hey, me and the girls are going to take a weekend away, kind of clear my head, and I'll be back Sunday night, whatever. If you're willing to leave and there's no agreement on that or time frame in that, and maybe Sarah has it, that's just an easy segue into, well, I'm going to stay gone. Like, this is better.
Yeah, I think there would be definitely need to be a mutual decision and parameters set around.
And not to say that separation's not a good thing sometimes, maybe it is. But if the cause of the separation is things are bad and I don't want to deal with them, that's just a move towards divorce. I think if it's like, we need space to figure out how we're going to deal with this, that's different. And there's intentionality in that. So the intent of the heart matters in that place. So,
and are you done with that thought?
Yeah.
Okay. So another thing that I would suggest for remarriage is to find a couple who has been together a while. Doesn't matter if it's their first or second marriage, but someone who displays maturity and who is healthy and who has worked through their own issues in a healthy way. Find them and ask them to mentor you as a couple. And to be completely honest, we don't have that.
Right.
But we have friends who are married, who are our friends, who would absolutely welcome us with open arms if we have questions, or if we just can't get through something. We have those friends who we can call upon.
And when we were in Japan, there was a chaplain there.
Yes.
If you're in the military and you're listening to this, you're in the Air Force, Chaplain Mansberger.
He's amazing.
The dude's heart is for marriage. Like, he loves couples. Like,
yes.
So while we were there, his counsel and his mentorship for both of us was just healing and perspective changing.
And he's so gracious. He was a godsend.
So we had that during that time that we needed, and we need it now, just because healthy marriages look to healthy marriages. Mm-hmm. So that's kind of it. We're at 45-ish minutes almost, and I think that's probably good. So just kind of recapping, like, do you boo? Be picky. Make a list. No. After you know who. Oh man, I fought it.
You're gonna make a graphic. Jeremiah, can you make a graphic, please?
And then, but be gracious in that. Like, be gracious with yourself and your list. Grace-filled. Is gracious and grace-filled the same thing?
I don't know.
Allow grace to pour over your list. So do you figure out who you want to be with? What was the other thing?
Dang, I just had it in my head.
Oh, date. Like
be intentional with
be
your time.
Be intentional about your time and dating. And I would say, don't compromise. And then know that marriage is hard. Remarriage is hard. It's
So
difficult.
be prepared for work.
You're going to bring difficulty, your baggage in there that, and kind of just one thing I want to say, like, expectations are okay, but communicate those expectations. And we talked about that before. Communicate those expectations so that you guys can discuss whether or not they're realistic expectations, because we all expect things from other people, and that's okay. It's part, like, I expect things from Sarah as a wife, and she expects things from me as a husband. But we've had to have conversations as to whether they were realistic expectations. So know what you expect, and be willing to talk about them, and willing to accept whether or not they're realistic expectations. As you go into remarriage and are remarried, because that will ease some of the difficulty, and find that couple that can walk you through that you can go to for counsel. And counseling's not is a healthy thing sometimes. So find a counselor. If you guys need it, find a counselor. So is that
I
it?
think that wraps it up.
So that's it. We would love to dialogue with you. You can email info@theoddshow.com, or you can email theoddshow@gmail.com. You can comment on the website, theoddshow.com, or you can hit me up on Twitter @odd_show. There's a G in the word odd, the G silent. And we'd love to dialogue with you. If you have other questions, if you have opinions or a different view on some of these things,
Or if you have
Let us
something
know.
that you've experienced and
Yeah.
a bit of advice you think you could give
that you can add to that list. So that's it. Thanks for watching. Thomas called them audience. You guys are a great audience. But next week, maybe Thomas and Angie. Next week, maybe me and Thomas. Next week,
Maybe me and Angie.
Sarah and Angie on Skype. So if you have things that you want to ask the ladies, maybe
About
that's
marriage, life,
whatever,
anything.
parenting. Maybe that's something that you could send in, and we'll hit you up on that. Until next time, stay odd. Love you guys. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll catch you next week. Bye. Thanks for checking out The Odd Show. You can follow Bruce on Twitter @bpags2 and Thomas @BlenderZen. Remember to rate and review us on iTunes and share us with your friends. Until next time, stay odd.